Ladies and gentlemen, gather round, because I've got a juicy story about the most notorious gangster of all time, Al Capone. But hold your judgment for just a minute, because this ain't your typical gangster tale, and he definitely wasn't your average criminal. First things first, let's set the stage. It's the 1920s, Prohibition's in full swing, and Chicago is a hotbed of illegal booze, speakeasies, and rival gangs. Al Capone, the guy we're talking about, he's sitting at the top of the whole Chicago crime scene, a mafia empire that makes Tony Soprano look like a paperboy. Capone's got the swagger, the Scarface, and a penchant for fancy suits, but here's the thing, he's a villain with a twist of humanity, who in retrospect did more good than harm. Let me explain. We will start with the bootlegging business, the heart of Capone's empire. During Prohibition, he controlled a massive operation that supplied Chicago and beyond with illegal booze. Now, I'm not saying he was doing the Lord's work, but in a weird way, he was giving the people what they wanted when the government said they couldn't have it. It's like he's Robin Hood with a bottle of gin instead of a bow and arrow. Making alcohol illegal was an idiotic move by the government anyways, and they repealed that law in a matter of years regardless. So was this really such a bad thing? Not at all. If anything, he was doing the country a great service by keeping the liquor flowing until the government got their act together. But now, let's talk about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the darkest chapter in Capone's saga. On February 14th, 1929, 7 members of the North Side Gang met their end in a Chicago garage, courtesy of Capone's men. It was a brutal act, no doubt about it. Capone, he had rules in the midst of all that violence. No innocents harmed, no lawmen touched. It's like he had his twisted code of ethics in the chaos. In Capone's case, it was a matter keeping the neighborhood safe. He was putting law and order back on the streets by taking out the trash the police should have handled. A lot of people said he used violence and intimidation tactics. Yeah, so it happens. Capone sometimes had to get his hands a little dirty, couldn't be helped. Sure, there were killings, bombings, and more bullets than a Wild West shootout. But in a way, he was keeping some sort of order in the madness. No doubt he was the bad guy, but not the worst guy, if that makes any sense. It was a small sacrifice for the greater good. As the saying goes, you gotta crack some eggs to make an omelet. Now, you may ask about his control over gambling and prostitution. Capone had his fingers in those pies, no doubt. But he also ran a tight ship. His establishments were clean, efficient, classy, and not entirely unwelcome in some parts of town. People knew what they were getting. It's a situation of dealing with the devil, you know. The man kept his reputation clean, no matter how dirty the business was, and that's worth something. Then, there's the whole tax evasion conviction. In 1931, the feds finally got Capone on the hook for not paying his taxes. It was like getting Al Capone for jaywalking when he's been robbing banks. But here's the thing, it was the beginning of his end, and in a way, it showed that even the baddest of the bad could be brought down by the long arm of the law. This is what the legal system does to people. When they can't pin anything on you, they start pulling straws. This was just a case of bad luck. You got big pharmaceutical companies killing and poisoning millions of people, and they get to get away with it. Why? Because they pay their taxes. It's completely insane. So Capone did his stint at Alcatraz, and it wasn't exactly a cakewalk. His health was deteriorating, and he was a shadow of his former self. It was like watching a lion in a cage slowly turn into a house cat. Now, something the feds will never admit to is the great impact on law enforcement this whole thing had caused. Capone's reign of terror prompted the feds to up their game. The FBI started taking organized crime seriously, and Capone was the poster child for why they had to. It's like he unintentionally made law enforcement better at its job. And last but not least, the clout and notoriety for the ages left by this man. Even after his imprisonment and death, Capone's legend lived on. He became this bizarre symbol of the Prohibition era, a complex character who blurred the lines between good and bad. People couldn't stop talking about him, like he was the star of his time. There were movies, television shows, and books dedicated to the name Al Capone, so don't just think of him as a one-dimensional gangster. He was an icon. That's all. Subscribe for more.